Medieval blacksmiths were among the most important people in their communities, responsible for crafting the tools, weapons, and armor that allowed people to farm, fight, and thrive in the dangerous medieval world. But what was the life of a medieval blacksmith actually like? Most other jobs required some type of reading and writing skill, but not blacksmithing. They were responsible for creating everything from horseshoes to weapons to armor, and they were highly respected members of their community. In fact, most blacksmiths worked in large workshops with lots of employees. For example, in Paris during the 13th century, there were over 1,000 employees working at the Royal Forge. This is because the tools and equipment used in blacksmithing require handles made out of wood. For example, the hammer is one of the most important tools used by blacksmiths, and its handle must be strong and durable in order to withstand the constant pounding. Over time, blacksmiths learned that the best type of wood for hammer handles was hickory, ash, and oak. And do you think you could be a medieval blacksmith if you had to? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more medieval content. Thanks for watching. These woods were dense and hard, so they could withstand the stress of blacksmithing. Blacksmiths would often make their own hammer handles, as well as the handles for other tools such as chisels and punches. They would carefully select the wood and then shape it into the desired handle using a combination of axes, saws, and knives. Once the handle was complete, they would attach it to the metal head using a technique called wedging. This involved driving a wedge into the top of the handle, which would expand the metal head and secure it in place. There were plenty of jobs that needed to be done in order to run the business, from mining to marketing to sales. They often had assistants to help them with the physical labor. Blacksmiths relied on each other for help and support, and they were there for each other through thick and thin. The medieval blacksmith was more than just a craftsman. He was an integral part of his community. He provided the tools and weapons that allowed the people around him to survive and thrive, and in return, the community supported him and his family. The medieval blacksmith may have worked in one of the most dangerous professions of the time, but he was also one of the most important members of his community. His work was essential to the survival of those around him, and he was respected and honored for his skills. In some cases, these assistants were also blacksmiths in training, but often they were young boys who were not yet old enough to work in the forge. Regardless of their age, assistants were responsible for helping the blacksmith with a variety of tasks, from gathering materials to heating metal to cleaning up the workspace. One of the most important things that an assistant could do was to help the blacksmith with the hammering. This was especially important when the blacksmith was making large or heavy items, as the extra set of hands could make the job much easier. Assistants would also have to be quick learners, as they were often responsible for helping the blacksmith make several different types of items in a single day. And the bigger the workshop, the more successful the business became. Despite being considered essential workers in the Middle Ages, blacksmiths weren't paid very well for most of history. This was especially true during the Middle Ages, and many blacksmiths were employed by kings or nobles who didn't pay them very much at all for their services. In fact, many blacksmiths were indentured servants who were forced to work for little or no pay for long hours with very little rest. They were often treated like slaves and had no rights. Luckily, some countries were more fair to their blacksmiths and recognized the importance of the work they did to keep their economy running smoothly. These countries paid their blacksmiths better wages and gave them more humane working conditions. For example, King of Denmark in the 14th century decreed that a smith should not work for less than 40 shillings a year, along with free lodging and food. He also mandated that they receive time off on Sundays and holy days, as well as every second Saturday afternoon. Even though this wasn't ideal compared to modern standards, it was a step in the right direction. Fortunately, this profession was quite dangerous and required physical strength. For example, when a medieval blacksmith heated iron, they didn't use fancy equipment like a furnace or gas-powered forge. In fact, only about 10% of their work was dedicated to creating military tools. The other 90% was spent creating farming tools. Farming was one of the most important things that happened in the Middle Ages, and without tools to help them do it, farmers would spend all their time simply planting and harvesting crops. Blacksmiths also created tools for construction workers, shoemakers, weavers, tanners, and others. They even made items like hinges, nails, and horseshoes. To put it simply, if someone needed something made out of metal, chances are a blacksmith was responsible for creating it. As you can imagine, that kind of work can get pretty tiring after a while. That is why medieval blacksmiths took several breaks throughout the day to rest their bodies and catch their breath. Instead, they used a simple hearth fire. Can you imagine how hot those things got? And that intense heat would be coming off solid rock, meaning if you weren't careful, you could burn yourself badly. We're not talking about a slight char or a first-degree burn either. We're really talking about serious third-degree burns that often left marks on their body for the rest of their lives. Not only that, but there were several parts of the process that involved incredibly sharp pieces of metal and molten slag that could easily cut up a blacksmith's hands or arms. And on top of that, heavy hammers, anvils, tongs, and other tools that could cause permanent damage, and you've got a recipe for a lot of injuries. This is why blacksmiths would always wear protective leather gloves and aprons to protect themselves from these sorts of accidents. In this video, we're going to find out just how brutal it really was. So grab your helmet and your hard hat because we're about to travel back to medieval times and find out what it would have been like to be a blacksmith in the Middle Ages. In order to become a blacksmith, you had to go through a brutal training process. The son of a blacksmith typically started working in his father's shop at age 12 or 13, performing simple tasks such as gathering raw materials, sweeping the floor, and running errands. He would work alongside his dad, learning the intricacies of the trade. Sometimes young boys would even live with another family while they trained them in different aspects of metalworking. Around the age of 21, he would become a journeyman, working under a master smith and continuing to learn more advanced techniques. It took about 4 years for a blacksmith to reach the level of mastery their community, but they could also come up with innovative designs and train new blacksmiths, which meant that not only did they know how to make all the common items needed, by becoming a master was very rare, with only 1 in 30 apprentices achieving the title. A master blacksmith could earn anywhere from 6 to 8 shillings per week, which was equivalent to the wage of a carpenter but higher than the income of most laborers, who made less than half of a shilling per day. Blacksmithing was an essential job in medieval society, making it one of the few occupations where you didn't need to be literate to succeed. Despite the danger, blacksmiths played a crucial role in medieval life. When you think of a medieval blacksmith, you might picture someone working alone in a small shop, but that wasn't really the case. They also made things out of wood. Most people probably think that medieval blacksmiths spent all their time making weapons, but the truth is they made a lot more than that. Medieval blacksmiths didn't just make things out of metal. Blacksmiths weren't the only ones that worked in the shop. Being a medieval blacksmith meant working in one of the most dangerous professions of the time, but it also meant being part of a close-knit community. Now it's time for you to tell me, what do you think was the most interesting thing about medieval blacksmiths?